Thank you. About a month ago, on August 21, most people in the U.S. were looking skyward. They were looking upward as they experienced either a partial or, in some cases, a total eclipse of the sun. As we know, in simple terms, at least I do, the moon comes between the sun and the earth, blocking both light and heat. But now let me be clear, I am no way an authority on solar eclipse. Many of you, I know, would know much more about this phenomenon than I do, and probably forgotten more than I know. But it was while I was watching the news coverage of this event that I recall the words written under God's inspiration as recorded in the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And it was remembering this passage that gave me the idea for today's remarks, which, as you have seen, I'm choosing to call soul eclipse. A soul eclipse is when we let something move between us and another type of sun, spelled S-O-N, the Son of God. So, a diagram of a solar eclipse might look something like you see on the screen behind me. This type of eclipse prevents us from having the light to illuminate the truth of God's Word, is how we're to live out our lives, and prevents us from experiencing the warmth of His love. Sometimes we find ourselves stuck in the darkness before we know it, and other times it is less subtle and like the result of our reaction to the death of a loved one or the diagnosis of a decaying disease. These, quote, sun blockers may or may not be sinful causes of our partial or total soul eclipse. I like especially how the writer of Hebrews describes the soul eclipse and how to avoid it. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Let's start first with the first verse. The writer says, "Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith." Now let me stop there. We're going to continue and finish that in just a moment. The writer of Hebrews calls these blockers hindrances or sinful entanglements. Some commentators refer to them as weights that hold you down in the same manner as a vine or a net that ensnares you. Some of them are sinful, while some are not in and of themselves. Some examples include grief over death of a loved one, sadness over illness, fear of losing your job, fear of a financial loss, influences of other theologies. I'm thinking here in particular of one that's very prevalent today, and you know as well as I, that there's this thinking that there are many roads to the top. I overheard a guy on the golf course say one time, you just need to be a good person. Doesn't matter whether you believe or endorse Hinduism, Buddhism, just be a good person. And even within Christianity, we hear very little on the Church of Christ. Many of our beautiful young people here and elsewhere have probably not heard any, perhaps very little, very few lessons about the history and the core beliefs of the Church of Christ. I grew up in the Church of Christ, and I was taught, and I believed then, that you're baptized for the remission of sins. And I have not seen or heard anything that changes this belief. And then there is the misplacement of priorities. And I guess some of you would argue that in a sense that permeates the others that I've listed here. If you heard Al Williams' remarks last week, he characterized these sinful entanglements as arrows shot by Satan. And I find it interesting that I'm here today talking about those things that we allow to block us from the Son of God. Al was talking about these very same entanglements, but from a different perspective, as arrows shot by Satan. And he and I had no idea what the other was going to talk about. I like the message that Al had about how important it is to put on the full spiritual armor to protect us from these arrows. And I certainly liked his emphasis on the critical need to know God's Word. That is an absolute must. The writer of Hebrews is urging us to pry loose from these blockers that sometimes, but sometimes that's very difficult to do. I want to share with you two examples of the first hindrance and entanglement that I listed, which is coping with the loss of a loved one. One involves a partial eclipse and the other a total one. This first example is a story about a friend of mine who had a daughter to die at the age of 11. He and his wife had one child. This little girl, she was born with a heart condition, but the doctors had assured the parents that she had gotten beyond that and would live a normal life. But here's how he tells me what happened. He was at work on a Thursday, and he gets a call from his wife and says, "You need to get to the hospital as quickly as you can. Our little daughter, the fingernails are already turning blue." And he says he raced there, and he tells me that he sat in her room from a Thursday until Sunday afternoon, never leaving, until at which point the little girl, he said, pinched his cheek, and it was evident that her spirit had left her little frail body. Well, he looks at me with tear-filled eyes and continues to say, "When I was in graduate school, we had a little 3-bedroom house. We had fixed up the bedroom at the end of the hallway as my office." And he said, "I can remember countless times hearing my little daughter crawl and then later walk down to my door and reach for the doorknob and call for me. And then I would hear my wife come and get her and say, 'Oh no, let's don't interrupt Dad. He's got important things to do.'" And he looks at me and he says, "Who did I think I was? That I couldn't open the door for just a few minutes and reach down and pick her up and hug her the way that she deserved and so needed." He's nursed the memory of the failure to do that with such self-condemnation for years. He just can't pry loose from the strong grip that has. But he's continued his Christian walk. He continues to worship. But he's partially eclipsed from the full measure of God's love. I know of another man in West Tennessee whose son at the age of 14 was diagnosed with some form of meningitis, and within 2 weeks he was dead. I remember seeing him at the visitation the night before the funeral. And he too, with tear-filled eyes, looked at me and said he was just getting to the age we would go fishing together. We went to sporting events, and we were able to discuss the pros and the cons, the pluses and the minuses of the competitors. He was beginning to ask me some good questions about the Bible. He says, "I just do not understand." Someone explained. His wife said her husband just could never cope with this personal loss. For years after the son's death, she would find him lying on his son's grave, face down, crying like a baby. He was totally intoxicated, drunk as a short-run solution for the pain he felt and the reality of this loss. He left the church, and he gave up on God completely, being totally eclipsed. And there's another blocker that moves between us and the Son of God, which is known as misplaced priorities. Now, this type of hindrance can be caused by different sources. Let's just talk about two. First, let's talk about economic success. Let me share with you the story of a Christian businessman who was partially eclipsed because of his economic success. I got this story from my sister, married to an elder in a church in West Tennessee, and she got it from his wife. And according to her, This man would set his alarm to awake at 5 a.m. every morning. And she said he would go to his favorite recliner in the den. He would pray, and then he would open the Bible. He would study God's Word and meditate on that. And that would happen from 5 to 6. And then he would go jogging and some kind of physical workout. They had a small gym in the basement. Then he hit it big. He sold 1, 2, 3 businesses. And she said that daily spiritual devotion became every other day. Every other day became once a week. And then once a week became non-existent. Oh, he continued to attend church, but he reversed the price tags, as so many do, putting their value on things that really do not matter the most, and neglecting those that do. Millions added to the balance sheet can have this effect. Well, while I'm talking about business people and economic success, I think the Bible teaches us that we are to give honor where honor is due. And I just want to take a second here to honor one of our own. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of resumes during my professional life. And last week I had the opportunity to see the resume of our Jeff Skinner. Virginia had him as a guest speaker in one of her classes at Cal Lutheran University. I don't know about Jeff's personal financial position. I've heard that he's had some big successes. I don't think he has to pass the hat at the nearest mall to eat. But I saw something at the top of that resume that I had never seen before. He had a category called core beliefs, and he had 3. He had creation was completed in 7 days about 6,000 years ago. Number 2, there was a worldwide flood about 4,500 years ago. And 3, Jesus the Christ rose from the dead about 2,000 years ago. And then right below that, for life's goal, he had one word: heaven. I was so impressed by this resume, and certainly here's an individual who has not been eclipsed. He has not allowed his successes in the business world to block his view and the receiving of God's light and love. Now, that's not the only source of misplaced priorities. One is misunderstanding what we have to look forward to. Let me call your attention to the last part of the verse we had gotten to a moment ago in Hebrews chapter 12. Let's go down to where you see, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. The passage says it was the joy that lay before him that got Jesus through the cross. If it got Jesus through the cross, what can it do for us? Someone asked me once, what are you talking about, the joy that awaits before us? If you want to find out the nature of the place that's been prepared for us, you need only to flip over to 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 4. Peter uses 3 adjectives to describe the place that awaits you and me. He says, it is imperishable, it is undefiled, and it is unfading, kept in heaven for you. What a marvelous spiritual truth for us to contemplate. So the question becomes, what is the key to avoiding a soul eclipse from misplaced priorities? I contend that it is understanding the joy that awaits us, but understanding the joy that awaits us can only happen if we understand the nature of the soul. What is the soul, some people ask. The soul is that part of you made in the image of God that lives inside of you. It is the eternal part of you. It is the important part of you. It is the real you. It is the part of you that will be living 1,000 years from now, either in heaven or hell, pure happiness or pure misery. Our soul is so valuable. What are the reasons? Why is it so valuable? Well, first, it's valuable because it is eternal. It's difficult for us to get our minds around something that never ends because we're so conditioned to think in finite terms. Now, we just started a new semester 3 weeks ago over at Pepperdine. It has a beginning. Well, it has an end. Sometimes it doesn't seem like there's going to be an end. Rhonda assures me that hang in, it will. But we watch a movie, it has a beginning and an end. We read a book, it has a beginning and an end. We eat a candy bar, it has a beginning and an end. Unfortunately. But so this notion of infinity, forever, slippery. It's difficult to grasp. You know, the body is a beautiful structure, but it is matter. It is going to die. We read in 1 Corinthians 15 that death is man's greatest impersonal enemy. But somehow people are able to keep this fact in the back of their conscious thinking and act as if they will live forever. Especially young people. And I can remember this, and many of you too that are my age or even younger. They just smile when you talk about the reality of death. Oh, that's years and years away. No real keen sense of mortality. Scientists study and talk about protoplasm. But protoplasm cannot smile in the midst of pain, love the unlovely, or contemplate God. There's something beyond protoplasm. The scientists know it. The Bible calls it soul. We've taken care of our body, we say to our Lord. Here's my body. I did not neglect it. I took exercises. The man that I referred to earlier, when he stopped the 5 to 6 spiritual study, he continued with his physical exercises at 6. He jogged regularly. We say we ate the proper foods, vegetables and fruits. I swallowed a fistful of vitamins each day. I went to see the doctor regularly. I visited the dentist every 6 months. My body was in good shape, at least until it died. Lord, I took care of my body, but I neglected my soul. I didn't feed the soul. I didn't give any vitamins to the soul. I never read the scriptures, your word. I mentioned just a moment ago how emphasized how important it is that we know the Word of God. I think everyone should love to read the Bible. Everyone ought to be a regular reader of the Bible. Everybody ought to strive to live by the Bible's teachings. The Bible ought to have central place in the life and working of every church. Let me ask you a question, and I want to know. Let's suppose in a room in your house you're told that God is sitting in that room. I think you'd be eager to go and sit and listen, and have a conversation, and let Him tell you what He wants from you, how to live out your life. But let's suppose you're told that in that same room there's a Bible sitting on the shelf. I know there may be some differences, some dramatic differences in some ways, but in substance, is there really any difference in going in and opening the Bible and listening to God's Word? That's where it's recorded. If you don't do that, you have to say, I never spent any time, Lord, talking with you and developing myself spiritually. I didn't obey you when you told me to love my neighbor. I didn't obey you when you told me about the neighbor down the street who was hungry, or the neighbor down the street who was lonely and just simply needed a friend with whom to talk. I just didn't have time for things like that. You see, the body is the house and the soul is the tenant, and it is eternal. Now watch this. Listen carefully. You cannot be unborn. You were born to live forever. You cannot stop the process. You can change the direction of your life, and isn't it wonderful that we don't have to change the way we are? But Jesus said there are two roads in life, a broad road and a narrow road. The broad road leads to destruction. The narrow road leads to eternal life. Every person here today is on one of those two roads. And you can change roads, but you cannot change the fact that you are a living soul and that you are going to live forever. And you really only have a relative short period of time to make the decision as to which road you're going to live. You see, during our earthly life, we have a mix of happiness and misery. But throughout eternity, after our physical death, we will have either pure happiness or pure misery. No mix, no hybrid. So therefore, loss of our soul in this life carries through to a life of misery that never ends. We must keep this in the forefront of our thinking if we're going to avoid a soul eclipse caused by misplacing our priorities. There is eternal bliss awaiting us, and what a marvelous spiritual truth that is to think about. Well, again, Al reminded us last week, and then part one of his two-part series on the devil, that the devil is real. It's not a concept. It's not just the absence of good. And I would remind you that God created the angels. God created Lucifer. But Lucifer was the best and the brightest. And he knew it. And he wanted to become God. Over in the Old Testament, did you know it describes Lucifer as looking at precious stones, as emeralds and diamonds? It's not this ugly creature we see around Halloween time or a sports team mascot. And so, Al, I think, warned us that Satan is going about, I think he was quoting Peter, to devour you, not take a bite out of you. Now, that kind of language sounds to me completely consumed. That is a total eclipse. Now, that's what Satan wants. Now, God got tired of him wanting to be God and kicked him out of heaven, and he kicked him here to earth. I wish he'd kicked him to another planet, but he didn't. And Satan wants you to not think long term. He doesn't want you to think about the things you see on the screen. God's concern for us and the nature of losing your soul and the ultimate price paid for redemption, loving us that much that he sacrificed his own son. Satan wants you to forget about that. He wants you to procrastinate about taking care of your soul. People think someday, somewhere, somehow, they will make it right with God. They know they've got to, but not now. They put it off. They procrastinate. Procrastination, regrettably, is a widespread sunblocker. It is so often the cause of a soul eclipse. Lucifer does not want you to focus on the joyful eternal existence that awaits the souls of you and me. You know, so many human beings are juggling their soul with a hope of catching it someday. But once you've lost it, there's nothing you can do. And I want to close with a brief story that I think illustrates so well what can happen if you play around and juggle with your soul. Some of you may have heard this story before, but I think it is so effective in communicating what I'm attempting to say. The story is about a famous juggler years ago. He had made a fortune with his extraordinary skills, and he decided to retire. He converted most of his retirement assets into this massive diamond. Some say it was one of the largest in the world, a very precious, large diamond. Well, he decided to return to Europe. And so he was floating on a ship in the Atlantic, and he was out on the deck basking in the sun in the way we think of Scott basking on the deck in one of his many cruises. Well, he's there, and along comes a little 10-year-old boy juggling some oranges, or at least trying to, rather clumsily. And so the the retired juggler said, let me see those oranges. Well, you can imagine. He started juggling them, and it was quite evident rather quickly that he was a pro. And he was tossing. A crowd gathered, and they were oohing and aahing. Well, the attention got to him. So he said, wait a minute. So he dashed back to his cabin, and he emerged. And he was holding this gorgeous, valuable, sparkling diamond. And what do you think he did? He began to juggle this diamond with those other oranges, tossing it high into the air. The people were just cringing and said, no, please, don't do that. That's too risky. Don't lose your life savings. But instead of their insistent pleas, he continued to juggle. And he said, well, what's this? So he threw the diamond up so high that it disappeared. And so everyone was just standing, anxiously looking. And here the diamond began to float down, glittering, sparkling as it reflected the sun's light. And it came down, and the juggler reached with his hand, and just before it was to go into his hand, there was an abrupt, sudden movement, a lurching of the ship. The diamond fell into the deep, dark Atlantic waters. Lost, gone, forever. So, what is the solution for solar eclipse? The recipe is right there. We read it in that passage from Hebrews. Look at this slide. This is the way it should be. Nothing between you and the Son of God. The blockers have been gone. You have pried loose. You have rid yourself of any hindrance, anything that's coming between you and the love of God. The answer there, if we go back to that passage, the writer of Hebrews says, let us throw off, pry loose, get rid of everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And do what? Fix your eyes on Jesus. Fix your eyes on Jesus. If you're going to get both the light and the love, you got to do that. I hope you will do that this coming week. If you're here today and you think you have a hindrance, we're going to sing a song in a moment, a beautiful song. And the elders are here. They will be so eager to help you in sharing whatever need you may have. Or if you're watching the broadcast, I think there's contact information. They would also be eager for you to contact them, and they would try to help you in any way they could. This Christian hymn that we're about to sing is entitled, Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus. I thank you for listening. So let's stand and sing this beautiful Christian hymn.